I want to begin by saying that I have never gotten more calls, more texts, and more emails asking me to either explain or debunk the pro-Palestinian arguments. I got a lot of calls this week wishing me a refuah shalema, a lot of emails, a lot of texts, and I really, really appreciate it. I really do. And like you can see, I'm still breathing. So that's a good sign. I have a little bit of a sore throat, as I said, because they had to stick that thing down my throat when they put me out for the surgery. But I'm back. I'm breathing. I'm happy. But boy, I sure got a lot more asking about, not just from people that didn't even know I had surgery. You know, they were just calling and texting and what happened? What do we say to these people? They got to be lying. Okay, so today I'm going to devote this entire time to exposing just 4 of what I believe are the most egregious lies that are spread by the anti-Israel videos and reports that appear on YouTube, in social media, and the big culprits, the Associated Press, BBC, CNN, ABC, MSNBC, CBS, the New York Times, Reuters, and all the rest of those places that are trying to go for clickbait, the clickbait mongers who shill for their corporate masters. They're unbelievable. But let me say up front that this is not something that can be dealt with in just a couple of minutes. These are not simple issues, so I will not only explain them, I'm going to help you debunk the top 4 lies that are spread by the pro-Palestinians in the media. The most important way to do this, of course, is knowing not just the history, but even as important, the context of what was going on at the time and the values that people had that drive these things that are going on, these tragic situations as we see them. So to begin, we must first identify which of these 4 repeated and widespread anti-Israeli arguments, what are they? 1, the Zionist movement is a European colonist movement. That's the first one. The second one, the Jews stole land from the local Palestinians in 1948. The third, Israel keeps on stealing land by building settlements. And the fourth, Israel targets and kills civilians. Boy, do I hate that one. Israel targets and kills civilians. Okay, let's start with number 1. As you can see, there's a lot to cover here. The Zionist movement is a European colonist movement. Is it? Well, while the media continues to position the rise of Zionism this way, that's pure propaganda, as are the other 3 that we're going to discuss. To be sure, there would have had to have been a Jewish empire in Europe for this to have happened. On the contrary, can you name a single place or time in Europe where Jews were not a persecuted minority at some way or another? Can you mention one time or one place? Not only that, but most of the Jews in Israel, beginning over 150 years ago until recently, did not come from Europe. They came from the Muslim countries that expelled them all. Well, almost all. So there were more Jews from the Arab lands than from Europe over the last 150 years. Jews from Europe and from Muslim countries have been making aliyah or going up to Israel for centuries. More recently, emigration from the United States, Canada, Asia, and Australia joined the Europeans and Muslims. Don't forget Russia. The question is, why do so many Jews want to leave the land of their birth and move to that land, the size of New Jersey, that is in such a horrible neighborhood? That land, of course, is Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. The reason? You have to go back to the Bible. the Torah, the Tanakh? The answer is biblical. It is because the Tanakh tells us that Israel and Yerushalayim are the holiest places for the Jews. On the other hand, the holiest places for the Muslims are declared in all Islamic holy texts as being Mecca and Medina. Did anybody hear me mention Yerushalayim? I didn't. Mecca and Medina. So what really is Zionism? The word comes from the Hebrew Tzion, which means homeland. Zionism means return to the homeland. It is therefore a Jewish nationalist movement, not a European colonialist movement. It's a Jewish nationalist movement that began around the time of World War I. So we got to have context as to why. That's history. But why? Well, it's really quite easy to understand when you understand the context. The World War I caused the largest empires of the world to collapse. There was the Austria-Hungarian Empire, the German Empire, the Russian Empire, and a generation later, the British and the French empires, and they all fell apart. They all broke apart. The idea of saving a nation state for the Jewish people began to get some traction among Jewish communities during that time. Why? The act of desiring to join together based on a common social structure was not unique to the Jewish people. We didn't come up with this. Due to the collapse of the empires, many nationalist movements were born. The Hungarians wanted to be by themselves. The Germans wanted to be with the Germans. The Austrians wanted to be with the Austrians. The British wanted to be with the British. The Russians wanted to be with the Russians. And those from other empires were quite vocal about wanting to form states that were based on historical nationalism. It was the common theme of the day. It is in this context that the Zionist movement was and remains the national movement of the Jewish people to have a Jewish homeland, a Jewish state, so they could live together, just like the Hungarians wanted, just like the Germans wanted. So as you can see, it is anything but a European colonialist movement, since Judaism was never compatible with the Christian Europe. Never. That debunks number one. Now we go to number two. The Jews stole land from the local Palestinians in 1948. Frankly, I find this even more outrageous than the last lie. There is not one, by the way, don't believe a word I say. Go look it up. There is not one single example anyone has given of a Jewish settlement that was ever built on stolen Muslim land before November 1947. That's a point that's important. Before November of 1947, there was not one example in the history of the world where the Jewish people stole land from the Muslims. Not one. So I'm interested only in finding the truth. So if anybody can give me one example, please share it. But remember, you're only going to be able to give me not many if you can do any. There's just no examples of it. I said before November of 1947, because that is when the UN proposed dividing the land of Israel into two countries. That's when the two-state solution was proposed by the United Nations. One for the Jewish people and one for the Arabs. Why do I call them Arabs? Because that's what they were called then. They had not yet named themselves Palestinians. They were referred to at that time as Arabs. There were no Palestinians. Anybody who lived in Palestine were Palestinians. And guess who lived in Palestine? Jews and Arabs and Christians. Remember why this two-state proposal wound up in the circular file at the time. You remember? I know I was born a year later, but still. or 2 years later, actually. But this notion of having to live next to Jews was so against Islamic values that they not only said no, they started a war to eradicate the Jews in Israel. November 1947. They lost so badly, they wound up losing some land. This happens when a country starts a war with a neighbor and loses. It happens. The borders change. It happened all the time. Look at the maps over the years, how they've changed of the world, not just of Israel. Remember, Israel was willing to accept the terms as provided by the United Nations. But while defending itself, it wound up capturing, not stealing, more land. This is how wars work. As for all those pro-Palestinians who continuously call for a two-state solution, tell them that it has been on the table multiple times. Officially, it was proposed the first time in 1937, and then again in 1947, as that was with the United Nations. And it was proposed again by Henry Kissinger, Zichrono Livracha, he passed away the other day, in 1993, and proposed again by Bill Clinton in 2008. Each and every single time the Arabs rejected it out of hand, and Israel always, every single time said yes. The Palestinians have said over and over that they will never accept a state next to Israel. They don't want one. They will only accept replacing Israel with a single Palestinian state. That is the only thing they'll accept. They don't compromise. There are a couple of other facts that need to be pointed out. First of all, while there are no cases of Jews ripping off Arab land before 1947, there are historically documented cases of Arabs stealing land from the Jews before 1947. Ironically, this theft took place in Gaza, as well as other places. But in Gaza, there have been Jewish families living there for generations. In 1929, the Arabs began violent anti-Jewish riots in Gaza. The Jews were forced to escape for their lives. The Muslims took over the Jewish property, paid nobody anything. And to prove this, during these last few weeks in this war with Hamas, the IDF found a synagogue from this period. They found it, and here it is. It's on the videos. You can see it. It was from that time. Why would the Jews leave a synagogue? Remember, these were anti-Jewish riots. That wasn't a war. Not only that, they wanted the Jews out of Gaza, period. Israel is not interested in taking the Gazans out of Gaza. They only want to completely destroy the Hamas, the terrorist organization. And as of yesterday, we have learned there are 9 other terrorist organizations in Gaza that work with Hamas. How many civilians do they have there? Seems like everybody works for Hamas. The second fact, and this is really, really important, and we shouldn't forget it, is that there was no such thing as a Palestinian people when these riots occurred in 1929. This was when that land was controlled by the Ottoman Empire, Turkey. Considering the millions and millions of pilgrims who have visited Eretz Yisrael during the last 3 millennia, 3,000 years. You believe this? 3,000 years. Millions and millions of pilgrims have come to visit Israel. Perhaps some of us are too. I did. Maybe I know some of you did. Why did not so much as one of them ever meet a Palestinian before the 1960s? Why? It is because the Palestinian people were an invention of the 1960s. Truthfully, it really started in the 1920s, but not until the 1960s did they start to see themselves as a people. Until that time, the name was used more like a sect or a group of Arabs who happened to live there. Anyone who lived there was a Palestinian. They lived in Palestine. They outwardly identified as Muslim Arabs, not as Palestinians. So again, I don't want you to believe me just because I said it, because you like me or you trust me. Please don't just take my word for it. I beg you. Look, you and I both have a bias toward Israel, so we're all going to want to believe what I'm saying. But I urge you to look it up on the internet. Look it up. You can find newspapers from the 1930s and look and search. You will not find one article that refers to Palestinians as those people that we're talking about today. You just won't. They don't exist. Anyone who lived there was a Palestinian. So, number 3, that's the end of 2. It's debunked. 3, Israel keeps on stealing land by building settlements. All right, this one's really a more complicated issue, but it's still something we should discuss. I question the wisdom every time when Israel builds settlements on land that they had given to the Palestinians. And they have, not often, but they have. But when it comes to Jerusalem, I don't have any questions about that. Jews have lived there on and off for millennia. The situation is a bit different for Jerusalem than for anywhere else. In 1929, the Muslims violently forced the Jews who lived there to disperse to other lands. During the Six-Day War in 1967, Israel won back all of Jerusalem, and they still control it to this day. That fact is an uncomfortable truth for the Muslims, who ignore Israel's victory, and they continue to insist it is theirs because they have the Temple on the Mount. That's what they used to do. They used to go in, defeat enemies, and build temples there so they could declare it was theirs. But you know what? Maps are written by the winners of wars, not by the losers. Maps are written by the winners of wars, not by the losers. So since Israel clearly won that war, and since Jerusalem is now being recognized by an ever-growing number of countries as the capital of Israel, the capital of Medinat Yisrael, the state of Israel, how does anyone have the right to say that Israelis have no right to settle on land that is theirs? This is especially true since Israel protects every single holy site in Jerusalem, every single one, the Jewish ones, the Muslim ones, the Christian ones, and every other religious organization. And there are so many in Israel, different kinds of religions, so many different kinds. Baha'is, you name it. Israel protects and guards every single one of them in the Israeli land, every one. The important thing to remember is that these Jewish settlements in Jerusalem have nothing to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the war with Hamas. It's separated from that. It has nothing to do with it. To demonstrate this, in 2005, Israel withdrew from off all their settlements in Gaza. Every place where the Jews lived in Gaza, they came out. They were forced to come out, not by the Muslims or the Palestinians that live there that are not Jews, but by the Israeli government. They physically went in and took them out. And since 2005, Gaza has been a completely free area. The Gazans have had 18 years to show the world, Chai, life. They have had 18 years to show the world that without any Jewish presence at all, they had plenty of time to flourish on their own. Did they? Instead of improving their standard of living, It went down. Other than the billions in US dollars that come from the world trades in US dollars, but other than the billions and billions in US dollars that go directly to their top leaders, who do not, by the way, even live in Gaza, they live in Qatar, they spend the rest on building and shooting rockets and building tunnels and teaching and marketing hate. Again, do not just take my word for it. Look it up. All you got to do is look at their constitution, Hamas's constitution. Their one and only reason to exist. They have only one reason to be. That's to destroy Israel so that they can spread Islamization to the rest of the world. It's really not about Israel, is it? With a neighbor like that, how can anyone blame Israel for having to spend so much of its gross national product on its defense? How can anyone blame Israel for wanting to destroy not the people of Gaza, God forbid, but Hamas and the other terrorists, which are all a puppet of Iran? Number 3 is debunked. Let's finally hit the last one. 4. I told you this wasn't going to be short. I keep my promise. Israel targets and kills civilians. This one, can't believe this. The claim is that more Palestinian civilians are dying in the conflict than are Israeli civilians. Well, that's true, probably. But while it is probably true, I can't guarantee it, it's hard to know because the body count numbers are coming only from Hamas. If Israel says that 4 Israelis were killed by Hamas, that means that 4 Israelis were killed by Hamas. We all know that. A few months ago, when some rogue Israeli civilians rose up and killed some Palestinian civilians, Israel first checked it out and then had to admit it. They didn't hide it. They sincerely apologized for it. They jailed the Israeli attackers, and they are still doing it. For some of them are still going on. They jail them, and they offer restitutions to the affected families. The media headlines the attacks all the time, but did they ever mention about the Israeli government's response? I didn't see it. Did you? The thing is, Israel will not give erroneous body counts just to get sympathy from the consumers of the news. Hamas does whatever it can to put as many people in body bags just to make it look as if there are more dead than were killed by the Israelis. We saw that happen as Gazan civilians left that hospital against Hamas's orders and were shot dead. The cameras picked that up. They couldn't blame Israel anymore, but at first they did, and everybody believed it. They also staged children for photos and videos with ketchup on them. This is provable. They pour ketchup on the kids and say that they were injured by the IDF. I'm always appalled by the number of media outlets that rush to publish them without requiring any validation whatsoever. They publish this garbage. The body counts put out by Hamas as 2,000 dead will generate more clicks to their lies than if they had reported that 5 or 10 or 20 were killed. By including pictures of children in the headline, that gets even more clicks. So much more powerful. So who are many of these children who really are injured? You know who they are? Many of them are trained and active Hamas terrorists. Most of them are between the ages of 14 and 17, but some are as young as 10 years of age. You get pictures of 10, 11, 12-year-old kids that were killed fighting. These are children themselves, but they're also fighting Hamas-trained members. When including the number of these active terrorist-trained children as civilians, that makes Hamas reported body count numbers even more suspect. But wait, that's not all. There's more. And we all know this. You don't have to believe me. You know it. Hamas fires rockets from hospitals and schools using the children in those facilities as human shields. The UN found these schools that teach Palestinian children. I'm sorry, not found. The UN funds these schools that teach Palestinian children to love, to hate the Jews in Israel. They teach them to love, to hate the Jews in Israel. To make matters even worse, Hamas has fired rockets and guns at its own people, accusing Israel of committing the atrocities. The fact is, the IDF has never once, ever once, intentionally aimed at Palestinian civilian adults or children. They even tell them to leave. Civilians, get out of here. We're going to destroy the area. Go south, go whatever. Do the Palestinians ever do that when they shoot rockets at Sderot or Tel Aviv? Never heard it. The bigger fact is when Hamas and their jihadist friends fire rockets from a school or a hospital or a library, they will often place women and children next to the launchers to protect them. The blood of these women and children stains the hands of Hamas, not Israel. Even so, the pro-Palestinians say this has to be this way because of the way Israel treats the Palestinian people. Great argument. But their anger is clearly selective outrage. Just recently, Pakistan announced that they're expelling 1,700,000 Afghans from their country. They're going to take them out. They should leave. You can't stay here anymore. We're going to expel you. Where are the protests? Where is the global outrage? Where are the headlines? 500,000 Syrians have been killed and 12 million of them displaced. And Assad gassed his own people. Where are the protests? Where's the global outrage? Where are the headlines? 377,000 people have been killed in the war in Yemen, and an estimated 4,500,000 people have been displaced from their homes. Did you hear anybody protest? Is there global outrage over this? Where are the headlines? What about all the children there that have no food and are starving to death? Hear anybody running to help them? 300,000 people have been killed by the war going on in Iraq right now, and 9,200,000 of them have been displaced. Where are the protests? Where's the global outrage? Where are the headlines? 100,000 women in Ethiopia have been raped. Where are the protests? Where are the women's organizations? Where's this global outrage? Where are the headlines? 1,300,000 Uyghurs have been held in re-education camps, as they call them, in China, in unknown conditions ever since 2017. Hear anybody protesting? Got the global outrage going on anywhere? Anybody see the headlines? Now, Israel. You're just talking about millions of people just now, right? 1,400 Israelis were massacred, raped, tortured, and 240 kidnapped on October 7th. That's a lot of people for Israel. It's not millions, not hundreds of thousands. On October 8th, streets all around the world were filled with hate. The very next day, protesting against Israel. There were calls for globalizing the Intifada before Israel had even started its defensive military response. Headlines called for a ceasefire almost immediately. to protect the innocents who live in Gaza. Notice the difference? It's clear that unless Jews are involved, nobody cares. Nobody cares. It is hard not to draw the conclusion that maybe it is not really about the Palestinians. Maybe, just maybe, it is all rooted in anti-Jewish hatred. I can't call it anti-Semitism because Arabs are also Semites. But the pro-Palestinians use bombastic lies when they claim that Israel is employing genocide, ethnic cleansing, occupation, and colonization against the Palestinians. Beside the fact that not one of these claims comes close to any rational, logical, or factual reality, the most important thing is also ignored. Don't forget it. While even one casualty is too many, the real number of casualties in the Israeli-Hamas conflict that it has caused is actually, as I said, one of the smallest conflicts currently going on in the world. It certainly gets the most media attention, though, but the real atrocities are happening within the Muslim countries themselves. That's where they're all Muslim countries, I told you before. Don't forget that. There is no way, I believe, that Israel is perfect and that all Jews are saints. Not impossible to say. I am also not claiming that no Jew has ever done anything wrong. We all know how ridiculous claiming otherwise would be. But for every event which Jews intentionally kill Arab civilians, and we do sometimes, there are countless more incidents where Palestinians intentionally kill the Jews. This has always been true. It did not start after 1948. That's baloney. Only history, context, and values light our way to the real truth. Almost every single Muslim country are not democracies. Every one, there isn't one. I don't know of any real democracy, not even the ones with elections. Nobody runs. The citizens of those countries have no freedom of speech and poor human rights records. Just try, I dare you, just try to criticize Islam in a Muslim country. Just try. Better yet, only whisper to yourself that you do not believe in God and that all religions are nonsense. Try it. I dare you in a Muslim country to do that. Acceptance of women as anything but male possessions, minorities as equals, and the existence of an LGBTQ plus community in Muslim countries does not exist as compared with any Western society. I don't care how bigoted the Western society is, none of it compares with what goes on in Muslim countries. In fact, these people are treated with violence. Iran claims it does not have these issues at all. It can't have them because it targets and kills off the minorities, the women who don't play right with the way they want them to be, and anybody who's a member of LGBTQ plus. They're all killed. They don't have a problem. This is because we in the West do not share the same values with Islam. This is where values are important to understand. We don't have the same values and we can't comprehend theirs. Therefore, we don't know what's going on there. What does all this have to do with the Israeli-Hamas conflict? Well, if the Middle East was a peaceful place and there was only tension between Israel and its neighbors, then maybe we could blame Israel and call it a bully. But that's not the case. There seem to be wars going on all the time and conflicts and violence and massive human rights violations in all of the Muslim countries in the Middle East, every single one. I'm not talking Indonesia here, which has even more Muslims. I'm talking about the Middle East Muslims. Then how can Israel be at fault? How? Explain it to me. I know I'm not smart, but I can't comprehend it. This is not only in the Middle East. Remember Europe? Give a cook at London. Give a cook. Go look in London, Paris, Brussels, Berlin, and just about any major European city. Go look there. There are actually called safe zones where the Muslims live. You can't walk in those safe zones. You'll get killed. You'll get mugged. You'll get beaten. Where does the most violence occur in those cities? Is it in the Jewish communities? No. Is it in the Muslim communities? You answer that. You know I sound like a racist. I know that's what I sound like. But take some time to try to prove me wrong. Try to take some time to do that. I want to be proven wrong. I don't want to be a racist. Find anything that I have said today to be fiction. Anything. I really wish I could be proven wrong, and I promise I will take what you say seriously. Unfortunately, it is a fact that Muslim society, be it the Palestinians, the Syrians, the Yemenites, the Iraqis, the Iranians, the Muslim communities in Europe, they have not managed to create peace and democracy, and to even so much as be able to tolerate people who do not believe as they do. However, focusing on fixing all the blame on Israel or on the United States or on the Jews does not begin to fix the underlying problem at all. In fact, it hides it. The problem's foundation is generated by the values held by Muslim society, the ones from the Middle East. The media coverage of the conflict is absolutely crazy. It doesn't understand the values of Muslim society. If it did, it wouldn't agree with them. But this never ends. The media spends all day and all night sharing so much content that says very little. The war is not about Gaza or the occupation or a Palestinian state. That's never been what it's about. It is about one thing and one thing only. It is Islam's inability to tolerate Western values. Israel may be today's target, but we know the rest of the world is the target for tomorrow. I have one last piece of advice for each of us. This is it. Even if we are armed with all the facts, please don't waste your time arguing with stupid people, because as I have said so many times before, you can't fix stupid. For those great supporters of Hamas who hate all us Jewish people because they claim we enjoy unfair white colonist privileges, then put your money where your mouth is and stop complaining. Please, I beg you, leave wherever you live in the West and proudly join your Muslim brothers and sisters in Syria, Libya, or Iraq, or Iran, or Gaza, or the West Bank, or Jordan. Go and live in those lands of your dreams. I think your tune might change. Shabbat Shalom, Am Yisrael Chai, and God bless America.